What's up, Taiwan? I'm Tiffany Wong with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. The UN General Assembly debate has just wrapped up, and like most years, many of Taiwan's diplomatic allies used the forum to advocate for Taiwan's inclusion in the UN. Cadence Quanta reports.
This year's United Nations General Assembly debate has come to a close. For Taiwan, the meeting is an annual reminder of its exclusion from the organization. It's also a time when Taiwan ramps up its campaign to be allowed to participate. Every year, many of Taiwan's 12 remaining diplomatic allies also find ways to speak out about Taiwan's exclusion during the debate. As with last year, this session saw at least 9 allies speaking in support of Taiwan, with several focusing on Taiwan's participation in UN agencies like the World Health Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization.
Excluding Taiwan from agencies where it can and must contribute, such as the World Health Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization, undermines global capacity for collective problem solving.
It is a continuing absurdity that this country of 23 million people, a functioning democracy with a settled yearning for self-determination, a legitimate institutional expression of the Chinese civilization, with first world living standards, a land of peace and ingenuity, cannot be properly accommodated in the global bodies concerned with health, climate change, civil aviation, policing, and so forth.
Others focused on calling out what they say is China's distortion of UN Resolution 2758, a motion passed in 1971 removing the Republic of China, which is Taiwan's official name, from the UN seat representing China and giving it instead to the People's Republic of China in Beijing. While the resolution only decided which government would represent China at the UN, analysts say China uses that resolution to justify its broader claims to Taiwan, arguing it settled the matter. But Taiwan and its allies stress the resolution does not say Taiwan cannot participate separately in international organizations.
Tuvalu holds the strong view that the UNGA Resolution 2758 does not preclude Taiwan's meaningful participation in the UN system. And Tuvalu calls for the admission of Taiwan as a member of the United Nations and its specialized agency.
St. Lucia renews calls for the United Nations to allow Taiwan to meaningfully participate in the UN system. And I state categorically, Madam President, that UN Resolution 2758 of 1971 does not preclude Taiwan's inclusion and participation in the United Nations system.
9 of Taiwan's diplomatic allies also wrote a letter to the United Nations Secretary General, calling for Taiwan's participation in the UN. Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Jialong also showed up on the sidelines in what is the first known time a Taiwanese foreign minister has been in New York during the General Assembly debate week. He met with at least one diplomatic ally, Palauan President Serangoon Wipps Jr., as shown in photos posted by Palau's presidential office, a meeting Taiwan's foreign ministry refused to comment on. Taiwan has been advocating for its inclusion in the UN in various ways for over 30 years, with limited success. But each year, despite the odds, Taiwan's allies return to the UN stage, determined to keep its voice and calls for recognition alive. John Su and Cadence Quanta for TaiwanPlus.
Foreign Minister Lin Jialong says it's time for Europe to stand with Taiwan against authoritarianism. That came during an address at the Warsaw Security Forum in Poland.
And today, authoritarian regimes, many China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, have formed an axis of upheaval to challenge the rule-based international order. And China is largely seen as the decisive enabler behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As a result, democracies around the world must act in concert to counter the existential and the systemic threat.
Parts of Central and Eastern Europe have grown sympathetic to Taiwan since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, despite formally recognizing China. This is Lin's second time in Europe this month. Both visits brought protests from China, which claims Taiwan as part of its own territory and has threatened to take it with force. An active military officer also joined the foreign minister at the forum. Taiwan has seen a surge in Chinese military activity around the country. The Defense Ministry says it spotted 33 Chinese military aircraft and 8 naval vessels in the 24 hours up to Tuesday morning. 23 of those aircraft entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This is not Taiwan's airspace, but acts as a defensive buffer zone. Taiwan says it's monitoring the situation. It comes as China prepares to celebrate its National Day on Wednesday. A recent U.S. military intelligence report has revealed that China is rapidly expanding its commercial ferry fleet as part of preparations for a potential invasion of Taiwan. The report, first laid out by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, says large Chinese ferries have been modified to transport tanks and participate in amphibious operations. In 2022 alone, around 30 Chinese ferries took part in military exercises with the Chinese Army. Taiwanese officials say they see the vessels as evidence of China's expansionist intentions towards Taiwan. From furniture to prescription drugs, the U.S. is putting a fresh round of tariffs on goods from Taiwan. Now, some are quitting the U.S. market while others seek to adapt. John Van Trieste reports.
This furniture store in the central Taiwan city of Taichung has given up on the U.S. It's seen income drop 80% due to Trump administration tariffs. And with an extra 30% tariff on soft furniture coming October 1st, the owners have decided the U.S. market just isn't worth it anymore.
不合成本了，所以说我们就喊卡了。所以说很多的传统行业也是一样，包括我们做外销的，我们还是一直在转国内的一个订单。
Taiwan's government has been working to support industries affected by the U.S.'s 20% tariff on Taiwanese goods. But the country's International Trade Administration did not respond to TaiwanPlus's request for comment on these new tariffs. But furniture makers and Taiwanese exporters overall are not the only ones who will feel the burn from new duties. There will also be a 25% tariff on heavy vehicles, a 50% tariff on kitchen cabinets and bathroom vanities, and a 100% tariff on patented drugs made by companies that don't produce in the U.S. Some economists think specific countries like Japan, Singapore, and India could try to reach a deal with the U.S. to ease some of the pain on their medicine makers. There's also a view that industry will adapt, with supply chains spreading out to countries subject to lower overall U.S. tariffs.
No matter where you move, then the tariff will be the same. But I think but companies will naturally assume, for example, some countries are safer than others. For example, Singapore, which doesn't have a trade surplus with the United States, will subject to lower tariff moving forward. So I think the idea is to diversify its supply chain rather than permanently moving the facilities elsewhere. So I guess So, for example, the Chinese manufactured furnitures will perhaps looking at different options, for example, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia.
But U.S. tariffs may not end here. U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants to move from taxing physical goods to cultural imports. He's repeated a call he made earlier in May to put a 100% tariff on movies made outside the U.S. It's unclear how that would work or what legal authority Trump has to go ahead with the policy. If the idea were workable, it would upend Hollywood's often cross-border production model. But in the industry, at least, it seems the idea isn't yet causing too much worry.
Until it becomes more substantive than just a tweet, it's sort of hard to have anything to react to. You know, there could be a proclamation at some point, there could be a Federal Register at some point, notice, you know, and then you would get a little more meat on the bones in terms of, okay, this is what we can react to. And obviously anything they did would, you know, there would be a lawsuit saying that this is an illegal infringement on, you know, free speech and so on. But until there's actually some substance to react to, it's sort of hard to even take it that seriously, although you do have to certainly pay attention to it.
Even if unworkable, the idea of a tax on foreign-made films shows that even over half a year into the second Trump administration, questions about U.S. trade policy may not be settled soon. Luffy Li and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
A U.S. official is visiting Taiwan on a trade mission to discuss agricultural exchanges. Undersecretary of Agriculture Luke Lindbergh will meet with government officials and leaders from Taiwan's meat and dairy industries. He's set to sign a memorandum of understanding with Taiwan's Dairy Association. Taiwan is currently trying to lower Washington's 20% tariff on most Taiwanese goods. The U.S. is Taiwan's top foreign supplier of agricultural products, including a majority of its beef imports. Tighter U.S. export controls are extending restrictions to thousands of subsidiaries of blacklisted firms, many of them Chinese. The U.S. will now include companies at least 50% owned by firms on the entity list. Those on the list must get licenses to receive U.S. goods and services. Washington says the move closes a significant loophole in export controls, preventing diversions through third countries. China's Commerce Ministry called the move egregious, warning it would disrupt global supply chains. Industries likely to be impacted include chips, aircraft, and medical equipment. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a major deal for a ceasefire in Gaza. But while Trump calls it a peace deal, it's also a threat, and the U.S. could support Israel's military initiatives if Hamas does not agree to the terms. Standing side by side, U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced a new ceasefire proposal to end the war in Gaza.
Let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East.
The 20-point plan calls for the immediate release of the remaining Israeli hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th, nearly 2 years ago. It also calls for the demilitarization of Hamas and a transitional authority in the Palestinian enclave. Israel would release hundreds of life-sentenced Palestinian prisoners and eventually withdraw military forces from the region. Hamas has already rejected deals that contain similar conditions, but this time the U.S. is ramping up pressure.
I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer, but if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do.
Israel's biggest ally and arms supplier backing the use of force to eliminate Hamas. Netanyahu also supported the proposal and said destroying Hamas would be done by any means necessary.
If Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done.
In Tel Aviv, families of Israeli hostages broke into tears as they listened to the historic announcement, feeling hopeful that they could see their loved ones again.
It looks like finally, we have a deal to end the war, the bloody war in Gaza, and bring all our people back home.
One analyst said the deal was a win for everybody and that it would be a tempting offer for Hamas after 2 years of bloody fighting that has killed at least 63,000 Palestinians.
I think that eventually they have to. There is no other choice. I mean, everybody agrees that Hamas cannot and should not have any role in the future of Gaza. So I think that's a settled issue.
With pressure mounting for Hamas to agree to a deal, an end to fighting could come soon. But by what means depends on their decision, as Israel now has the green light to enforce their goals with the U.S.'s backing. Andy Shen, Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus. A week after a dam overflowed and flooded parts of Hualien, officials say they've made progress on recovery. The state-run water company says the water supply is now back to normal and it has paused water bills for affected households. The Economy Ministry says it's finished work to divert the river that overflowed and has repaired levees. They're also working on a temporary river crossing to ease traffic on the only road being used for disaster relief. Officials are on high alert for the dam as it still holds nearly 6 million tons of water. As of Tuesday morning, 18 people are confirmed dead and 6 remain missing. Thanks again for joining us here on What's Up Taiwan. I'm Tiffany Wong. Take care and see you next time.